Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to have Monica Packer here, and she's going to be talking about her pillars here today of what she does. And she's a powerhouse woman because I've had her in my phone ever since I think maybe on and off from the beginning of her being amazing podcaster. And she is going to be talking about identity and habits and fulfillment, those things that she has as her pillars today. So welcome, Monica, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I got to know you a little bit better before we started, and I'm just so eager to serve your community and connect a lot to your own story.
Yes, thank you. I think you have that depth of personality that I am drawn to. So I know that we're going to have a good talk today, and let's have you introduce yourself. Tell us about you and what kind of brought you to this point. What makes you come alive in your life too. So yeah.
I think I'll start with like a typical introduction. I'm Monica. Like you said, I'm a podcaster with a personal development podcast called About Progress, and it's coming up 6 years this fall, which is nuts. And the podcast was part of an evolution of me coming to know myself and figure out what it means to be a real living woman on earth. And it's been part of this long evolution process. It started as an experiment and of me trying to figure out how to grow outside of perfectionism. Growing up, I thought it only had to be all or nothing. And, all was the only mode I knew how to operate in for many years until I hit rock bottom in multiple ways. And similar to your story, that involved eating disorders and mental illness and other things. And it took a long time for me to recover. And in my recovery process, then I became another form of perfectionist that I didn't know existed. And it was an underachieving perfectionist. And that's where I was afraid of trying. I was afraid of putting myself out there. And it was honestly the roots of both sides of this perfectionism for me, the all and the nothing side, were the same. It was a misplacement of identity. It was me misplacing the sense of who I was on the outside, either on what I was doing or what I was not doing, on how I was succeeding or how I was failing, how I looked or how I didn't look. And once I came to grips with that, I was still trapped in the same trap as before, even though I had tried to change my life for so many years. That's what started that experiment. I was originally going to call this experiment Mediocre Monica, just me trying to lean into like, what can it look like to just be mediocre? So that way you're not either burning yourself out with the all, or you're not just standing on the sidelines, you're in the middle and you're still growing. And it turned into a podcast and then a community, and it's changed my life in many ways. But even if I didn't have all like the professional side to it, it would have changed my life regardless. It's been the deeper life that has changed the most and impacted the way I show up to my family the most. Honestly, that's probably been the biggest shift, is just I have what I can give to my family is myself instead of someone else who I became after years of that all or nothing cycle. So that's kind of, I have the typical introduction, but part of that is, we grew up, or not grew up. I feel like I grew up in California because that's where I grew into myself, but we lived there for 13 years, but now we live in Utah, my home state, with our 4 kids. And so that's a typical introduction, but now I'm going to give you a non-typical one because it has to do with this whole identity piece that I brought up, this kind of unfolding of myself. And it's still an ongoing experiment and work. And, I think as women, we always identify ourselves with our roles and responsibilities. I'm a podcaster, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, or I'm a disciple. None of those things are wrong. Those are all wonderful things, but they're not who we are. And a big part of the work that I've done for myself and with women is helping them identify who they are deeply, what they value, what they want, what brings them fulfillment, how they can build a sense of purpose into their day-to-day lives. And as part of that, I help them come up with an identity statement. So I thought that's what I would try to dig up to you to read what mine is. And I'm sure this will tweak, like I will want to tweak this right now as I'm reading it to you, but I'm just going to read what I currently have. And it's, like I said, it's allowed to change. So this is who I am. Okay.
Yes, let us know. We want to know.
This is it. Okay. I'm a powerful woman of love and light. I am a creator. I am a devoted leader in my home and community. I base my life on what truly matters and progress daily, both to do and to be good. And kind of my short version of that is I am a powerful creator of love and light. And that just really encapsulates who I want to be, who I know I can be deep down and live out my values with love of learning and creativity and self-development and, even the leadership draws I've had throughout my life that I neglected too. So that's who I really am, I would say.
Oh, I love it. What a great way to introduce yourself. I feel like, yeah, I can see who you are. And I'm grateful that you will have stepped into who you are more and more becoming, because as you've done that, you've blessed my life. I actually mentioned this. I took her podcast course, so I should mention this is on the podcast. In order for me to launch this, I had to take her course and to figure
awesome.
out at the beginning. I started back in 2020. And I was telling her before this, it launched on my birthday, March 13th, 2020. That 13th was a Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th is usually lucky for me. And I was turning 29, excited to celebrate my last year in my 20s. But then I remember that Friday is actually like when everything started shutting down and everyone started getting out. But the rest is history with that. But with you, I think this idea, and I've been thinking a lot about that. I think it's interesting that you're bringing it up, because the dichotomous thinking is really what supports our progression. And that's what I've been thinking about a lot. And I've have a lot of relationships in my life that are that way. And it's hard that I've become more of the person that's not that way. And I'm not going to be on that operating system anymore. And I think you show that with who you bring onto the podcast with Sally Osborne right before, this last week. And I listened to some of that, and you're okay to bring on all sorts of people because we all have truth and we all have a way to share that light and love that you're doing. So thank you for that.
Well, that alone means a lot to me. And that's been the biggest thing I've learned from the podcast, is that we all do have a story. And like you said, we all have truth to share. And I love learning from people. I love learning about their stories and what they have to teach me.
Great. Yes, I could see you have a love for people. Me too. With you being a coach too, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think then to break up in some people to help them out throughout all this crazy time right now, it's because I have that empathy, and I know you do, because you've gone through those changes that are actually, they hurt. The growing pains hurt. And so let's start it off here with talking about how you would explain what you do with this progress model, like this brand created. Like I told you, like I say in the beginning, these pillars. How would we start off explaining this to someone? Because this is a lot of what my listeners are wondering about, with how do I go from the point A to the point B where I really want to be? And coaching is that way of really cross that bridge. So how would you start off?
So this is a huge topic. And I say that only because right now I'm in the middle of overhauling my full coaching program, and the whole first module, which it's it will be like a year-long program. So it's a big undertaking. But the very first module is this. It's teaching women what progress actually looks like. We have so many parameters in our minds of what progress is supposed to look like. We have so many, ideas of what it should be looking like. We have so many pressures. We have so many teachers. We have the wrong ideas of what growth actually looks like. And I think if I were to just do a nutshell version, I would just ask the woman to think about, what do you think it should look like to grow, to progress? And for most of us, it's you put in the hard work, and as you work, you will find the change. And that's not how progress works. Progress is messy. It's not linear. It's not, from the bottom corner of a graph or a chart up to the top right corner. It's not a straight line. It's a squiggly roller coaster of a line. Progress is messy. Progress is not all or nothing. In fact, you make better progress with the mindset of doing something, not all, not nothing. Progress is small and it's full of failure. Failure must be part of the process. And that phrase, the process, is the foundation to how I view my progress model, like what it looks like to grow. The process is small wins build over time. Yes. And it's focusing on small wins and over time. And that blends down to like, what does consistency look like? Consistency looks way different than we're taught. What do good habits look like? Way different than the way we're taught. What does it look like to change? Way different than what we're taught. But every experience that I've had in my life of growth, and every woman I've ever worked with for years, and I'm even going back to the times where I was like teaching girls in my band how to play flute in junior high, like way back in my life, growth always happens in small and messy ways and over time. And we don't see it in the moment. So that's kind of the nutshell version of what this process looks like. But I think when women really embrace, oh, this is what growth is, it gives them the freedom and the permission to pursue it instead of thinking something is broken with them because they didn't get what they wanted when they wanted it. And I am no stranger to that desire. Even if we go back to my recovery, it took me years to recover from my eating disorders. In the beginning, I was disappointed because I wasn't changing as quickly as I thought I was working to change. And I remember going to my therapist and essentially asking him, so when am I going to get better? And he told me, this will likely always be a thing for you. This may always be your thorn in the side. I know that many women could hear that in recovery and it just be a depressing thing. But for me, it felt like a relief because that helped me know, oh, me getting better, it doesn't have to be overnight. Like I'm not broken. This will be something I struggle with, but not to the same extent or the same intensity. So even knowing that though, and I'm still taking this as an example, for years, I was convinced I was not changing. And when women are doing that work, they're putting in the work, they're trying, and they're not seeing the results or the outcomes. That is the lie we fall for the quickest and the most deeply. The lie that I am especially broken because I'm not changing the ways I want to and when I want to and how I want to. But as I continue to put in those small efforts, consistently, which again is a whole other idea, that just meant those building the small wins over time. Like now I can say, how many years later? I think it's 16 years right now. I think this is honestly the time when I came home from my London study abroad and then was like, I need help and went into the therapist office at my school. I was a mentor for freshmen and I sent a lot of kids there who I worked with. And I sent myself there one day, 16 years ago. And now I can say I'm a completely different person. Completely. And I would say that thorn in the side is like a teeny splinter, like a tiny little splinter now. Like it comes in there here. Sometimes it digs in. I'm like, oh, you again, but most of the time it's just like a tiny little one just here, like only now and then. Doesn't bother me. So even that has changed completely. But going back to those first few years, that was what I felt even more discouraged about than the actual behaviors, although those were controlling and consuming too, was my despondency over my inability to change. So that's happened with eating disorders. That's happened within my marriage. That's happened within my parenting. That's happened within my spirituality. That's happened within my business and my podcast and how slow it grows. Everything in my life has lived this out. And it's the truth that small wins build over time, but you do change in dramatic ways. And because of that permission we give ourselves to have that mess, it allows us to grow so much more. Like when I finally leaned in to that truth, that progress is messy, and I was allowed to do it messily, and I was allowed to do something, not all or nothing, that is what has exponentiated my growth more than anything else. It's a weird sort of magic. So that's where I'd start. Give yourself the permission to redefine growth and progress.
Yes.
That was very long. I'm sorry.
No, I loved it. I have a lot to ask you about. Okay, some of the things I wrote down is this trust the process, and definitely what you just said with the small wins, and we just keep pulling. So I use this analogy. of a Chinese finger trap. And the more we're pulling, it doesn't work. That we're pulling is as we let go, it will work. So like you're saying, it's more when you let go and you understand that the messiness is part of it, and you're going to let go of trying to control and be making it a perfect upward line, that it's going to happen. And that's one of my taglines with what I do in my course too, is the trust the process, because women are going through what I call the honeymoon stage. In the beginning, we reject mentality, but then in doing that, you have to have this time where you will eat and do whatever you want. If you want to eat at midnight, you can. If you want to be eating 8 tacos, you can. And you have to go through those wiggles first, because with going through that bottleneck, then you'll be able to realize, okay, I don't like the way I feel after I eat 8 tacos. I'm glad I'm letting myself eat later at night, because I just got so busy in the evening, and I wouldn't feel good if I didn't give myself enough food. So it's a lot of working out the kinks. But then I like how we're going to that other level of the identity of it, because women will think something's wrong with me. Why can't I get this down? But we think we have this timeline figured out, but it's not the case, because we may have our quirks and things about us that may take longer and may take shorter. And that's okay. Whatever it is what it is. And you don't fall into that lie. Never fall into that lie of feeling like you are broken. That is Satan. That is shame. And you're right too, also with the small wins over time. That whole scripture of small and simple things is, I think, what I leapt in heaven for. Like, I was so excited to come down and do the plan, because we knew over time we would have experience, and it would take small ways over time to experience. It's one of those gems I always hold on to. I have it on a board downstairs, small and simple things. Same with the individuality that I love and embrace, that we are individuals and we celebrate who we are. But I love, and one thing I wanted to say, that you are a flutist.
Yeah.
So I was in a book club recently, and it was about this girl who started having eating disorder. She was a violinist, and she started eating disorder. And I'm a violinist, and listen, I taught violin for years. That was my mom at home job. I would teach neighborhood violin. I was part of a symphony on and off for 10 years, the American Folk Symphony. And it's just, I love it. And I did some fiddling too, but it's part of probably how you and I connect. We are a natural perfectionists, and actually can be wielded in a great way. Being a flutist, you have to get on, I don't know exactly how it works. You have to get on that note right on it, or you hear it wrong.
Sure.
Other people get it wrong. Same with me on the violin, and like that. And then when I was reading that book in the book club, it dawned on me, and I was able to share this to the club. I was like, you know what? I like this book, even though it was like a teenage book. And a lot of people are like, oh, this is a drag of a book. It's a teenage book, but I end up liking it in the sense I'm like, because I identify with it. Sometimes you're a book reader too, or sometimes you just have those books. Oh, even though it's a teenage storyline, but it helped me realize, seeing, this is kind of my thorn, like you said, on the side. I have that tendency, but it can be wielded in a good way, to where I can be meticulous on what I do. And now, with help me have an eye for business, help me have an eye for when I see and coach people, like, okay, I can see beyond, using that intuition, that others, to get things right and to find that truth. And so, yeah, I thought that's probably kind of how you function and operate, which is still a great trait to have.
For sure. And that's like the interesting thing, I said I'm a completely different person, but to me, it's less that I changed, and it's more that I became who I am. And that for me meant that those strengths that were a part of my weaknesses are still in me. Like, it's just like any strength gone too far is a weakness. And that's where I leaned to for so many years in different ways. I'm still like on the Enneagram. I'm not super into Enneagram, but I just know my numbers. I know that I'm still an achiever. That's still who I am.
Yeah.
But it's in a way different way, which is kind of fun to think about. We can sometimes learning who we are just means making sense of what strengths have gone too far to the weakness zone, and how to better harness them in ways that are more alignment with who we want to be. So that's fun to think about.
Virtue device, but then you can realize, okay, can turn this back into my virtue. That is who I am. And I was created maybe to have my own little job to do. Like I just went and picked up some honey from a neighbor, and she has wild honey. And I wanted to start taking it so I could help my allergies, because I'm dying right now.
Yes.
Allergies
Oh
are
yeah.
nasty. But she showed me all her bees, and then I was thinking about that whole analogy with bees for a little while there. I'm like, yeah, these little bees are they all have their own little job and they do it. And so that analogy, I like to think in that way in situations, gives me food for thought, that we all are part of that. Even as children of God, we all have our duty and we have our purpose and what they need to do. Because I mean, I'm married to someone who's almost very opposite of me. He's a firefighter, and when he sees something, he goes towards it. Like something scary, he goes towards it, he's drawn to it. I freeze. And that's good for him. He is I think, naturally born to be a firefighter. He responds well to those situations. He calms people down, and so grateful for that he has that knowledge that we can be the yin and yang together. And that's part of where we talked about in the beginning, the dichotomous thinking. We don't need to have that where everyone needs to be a certain way, the black and white, especially even with people listening here on their journey to heal their relationship with themselves and their relationship with their food. So tell me, what then do you go into with that first piece of knowing that it's messy? Once they've assimilated that, where do they go next?
It all comes back to identity for me. And I'm even thinking just the basic habits that we want to work on, they still need to be identity based. And that's where, I mean, the deepest work is. It's the deepest and toughest, but also the most important life-changing work. To me, identity is knowing who you are and what matters to you. And as part of that, we have to think about what our values are, how we find fulfillment, what draws us towards that fulfillment, what draws us towards self-care, and so much more. But there is a good way to break it down. But if you're going to go to the basics, it's who am I and what matters to me? And women lose that along the way in the pursuit of trying to just be a good fill in the blank, whether that's your role as a mother or as a wife or like a disciple. It's whether it's like within a role and the responsibilities you carry with that role. We're trying to just do it well. We're trying, that matters so much to us that we're trying to do it well. But in the process, we lose ourselves to him. And so that separation is really, really important. I have a whole course on this that's called Finding Me that really breaks it down like step by step. But for those who are listening and just trying to figure that out, I think it can be as simple as the way it started for me. And I call it the do something list. We talked about not doing all, not doing nothing. When I was in that mediocre Monica phrase, I was in the phase 2 of not knowing who I was at all outside of my roles and responsibilities. And I knew I needed to change because the effects of not knowing who I was outside of my roles and responsibilities was what was making me show up to them in ways I did not like, that I did not recognize. I was resentful, angry, numb, kind of in a place of despair, just as a mom. Even just my day-to-day stuff that I was doing as a mom, like sweeping the floor, was enough to send me down an existential loop of this all that matters, that this is who I am now, so the way I had to the way I started this whole experiment began with me being like, well, who is Monica? And let's do this in a way where we're not thinking about goals. We're not thinking about achievements, and we're not even thinking about our responsibilities. Now that may sound really selfish to people, but I told you this in the beginning, the most important thing that has shifted for me is the way I show up to my responsibilities, because I have a self now to give to them. That resentment, that burnout, that anger is gone. Sometimes it might creep up in there if I'm not taking care of myself, but mostly not. And how it began was me just trying to uncover that again. Like, okay, so let's have a list where I am, the only purpose this list has is for me to find what helps me feel like me. And part of that included an uncovering of things that used to help me feel like me, like reading books or being outside or doing something creative, and also things I wanted to discover about myself or explore. And it could even have just started with things I was jealous that other people were doing. Like, oh, I wish I could do that. Or I'm really curious how they got into that. Or, like going to museums or even exploring career stuff, so there was like a long list for me of 30 things before I turned 30, which how monumental that age is of 29. And I'm 36 now, but that gift of, and I've done this list every year since, that gift of just having something where it's only about discovery, uncovering and discovering of me. That is what started this whole experiment and dramatically shifted my life, because it helped me find a sense of self outside of my roles and responsibilities. It taught me what my values were better. It taught me how to find fulfillment. It taught me what is self-care for me more. There were all these trickle down effects. And I do one every year, I said, but I also never completed. I've never completed a single list.
Right.
In the 6 or 7 years. Pardon?
And it could, because it also changes as the year goes on. Even
yes,
I made mine this year.
Oh, good.
I had never taken a picture and tagged you on it. I was like, I need to do that sometime.
That'd be fun to see.
But I think you'd even said that it kind of just changes. Things fall off, and you're like, actually, I don't want
for
that
sure.
anymore.
I'm going to revisit my list and take some things off. I think my list changed 3 times in 2020. Because of everything that went on. And I'm in that phase too. Halfway through a year, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take that one off and that one off. I'm going to do this one differently. It's flexible. It's not about achievements. It's not how many you check off. It's so different. And it not only changed my life, it's changed many women's lives in ways that have surprised me, because it's so simple. What it is you're just prioritizing yourself.
Yeah. And you're falling in love with the process of knowing yourself. There's a quote, and I have it I have a workbook that I sell, an online downloadable workbook to have people start intuitive eating in 14 days, 2 weeks. And I have a quote each day on the top before they learn for the day what they're doing. And it is one of them. I can't remember though who said it, but it's in there. If we need to fall in love with the process of becoming the very best version of ourselves. And maybe you've heard that quote before, but
I haven't, but that sounds totally on point.
That's what you're doing. I could totally see that you have fallen in love with that process.
Well, and that's funny. That brings us back to our first, the beginning of the conversation. As part of the permission to get messy, it's also the knowledge that the transformation lies in the process, not the outcome. Mm-hmm. The outcome will not give you the feelings that you want long-term. It's not sustainable to even think about any person who has got that gold medal or landed that job or hit that weight. If we're going to go back to the weight loss path that we both share, it's not permanent. That shift doesn't come with an outcome. The shifts come in the process. That's where the transformation is. That's where the real growth is. It's the process. And there's always going to be another gap too. You get to that place, you're ready for the next thing. Even if you're we should celebrate the goals that we achieve for sure, but there's going to be another part too. So we can't bank the ways we want to feel on an outcome even then. Right.
Well, process and progress. I just wrote it down here on the sticky note. They only have two letters that are different from each other.
Oh yeah. Never thought of that, but that's so true.
That's the C, and then you take out the C, put it in a G and R. Progress.
I love that.
Progress. And I also thought about what you were saying, and then I'll have you talk about one more thing, but that you're becoming as a child. I could see that's what we're asked to become as children to inherit the kingdom of God, because children are curious about life and love life.
Oh yeah.
And so we're becoming that way. And when you're that kind of person that's following the fire in our belly, and that's the last thing I talk about with my modules on the 12-week program I do with the coaching in the course, is when women have gotten to that point of healing the relationship and they've figured out some intuitive eating. It's an all-going process, but they're at a point where now they've freed up that space. They've taken out that old furniture and they need to put in the new furniture. And that new furniture is always involving 2 things. What is the fire in your belly? What makes you come alive? And I was coached on this as well, a very monumental coaching session I had with someone, and that it will involve people and, helping prepare for Christ's coming. It's always going to involve that, and that fire in our belly is not on our own. And anyway, it's as little children are, they have that goodness, and we come to earth that way. So
curiosity is key.
Yeah. So as if you were to finish up and say anything else about what you do and coach on, what would any last words on that and helping women make that change to, like you said, find yourself, the process of doing that. And that's what women I feel like here are even listening for, because they kind of lost themselves. They were maybe dieting, they were beating themselves up, and we're finding that new way to love ourselves. And what would you do? What would you tell them?
In terms of where to start or what to think of next,
Yes, what would be next?
some of the things I think we keep coming back to, or, one of the things we keep coming back to, I think, is just the permission. I would just start with permission to prioritize yourself again. And this can happen with you just giving yourself a little bit of time to yourself each day. And I would think starting small. I teach habits differently too. Habits is a big part of identity and action.
Yes.
That's how we live out who we are. If you're struggling with identity piece, maybe you can start in the habit piece of giving yourself space to explore prioritizing yourself again. But it kind of is a chicken and the egg question. But if we're just going to stick to like, what can they focus on next? It's learn how to prioritize yourself, like in real time. And starting small with that, even with you giving yourself 10 minutes of quiet in the closet on a regular basis, or a walk, or playing the piano, even if your kids have to be around, because that helps you feel like yourself. Or listening to Harry Styles is always a great way for me to feel like myself again, even when I can't leave the responsibilities, like this is not the time for me to say I have to go for a walk right now, but I can do something. I can prioritize myself in one way, even if it's listening to the music I want to listen to while we're cleaning the kitchen. It's not selfish. It truly isn't. I want to give women that permission. And
Right.
I have lived out the difference of being able to show up as myself to my family. I have so much more to give. I have special needs kids. They are demanding. And the last couple of years has been rough for them, especially. And I have my pre-pandemic and post-pandemic face to prove just how stressful it was. I can tell you honestly, we would not have made it as a family the last couple of years if I didn't have a self to bring to this family, because
Right.
they needed me. They needed the real me to be able to lead. That's why it's one of my identity statements, to lead my family, to
Mm.
show up for them in the ways they needed. And I'm so grateful that before the last terrible 2 years began as a family, I had a couple years of learning that part of who I was, of prioritizing myself again. That was it. That's how this all started with the do something list. It was me prioritizing myself in a really silly, weird way that I'd never heard of before. It was not a bucket list or a resolution list or anything like that. That's what changed everything, because I had a self to give from. So please give yourself permission to prioritize yourself.
I love that. Yes, yes, yes. I 100% agree with that. So I love that they have something to come away from and know what they can do next. It's small, and depending on where they're at, to just then do the next thing that gives yourself permission to give yourself that time. So thank you so much for your wisdom and
You're welcome, Laura.
your intensity. I love your character of really, you feel these things. You understand on your level that you've had that experience. And I can see that God prepared you for that, for the pandemic in that way over that time before. And especially now, as I think your kids are probably getting closer to teenage years, you're going to become a mom that's ready for them. But other than that,
Hope so.
yeah. And other than just the identity, we're not just moms, but that you are giving yourself to the world in a way that you'll be so happy when it's all said and done. And so thank you for your knowledge here today.
Thanks, Laura. And thanks for your work. I wish I had this podcast 16 years ago when I was starting my recovery. It would have been so helpful to have a woman like you who's not only in the trenches, but also making progress, but knows the tools and the journey and the path. So I'm grateful for the work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.